An original podcast from podlatino.com.
In 1984, the image was in charge, not as a metaphor, as a concrete, everyday, technical fact. Screens were multiplying in homes, businesses, movie theaters, and stadiums. Television was broadcasting live events that used to arrive only by radio or the next morning in the newspaper. Music videos had turned music into something you also watched. Movies were no longer just for the theater. The video rental store was changing the way people consumed fiction. And on top of all that, a new screen appeared. Smaller, more personal, more intimate. The computer screen. The world in 1984 was not just a collection of political events, conflicts, and discoveries. It was, more and more, a world being built through images. A world that was starting to see itself in real time. On January 22nd of that year, during the Super Bowl halftime break, one of the most talked about commercials in advertising history appeared. It was from Apple. On screen, a gray crowd marched in formation, uniformed, while a lone figure ran against the tide and hurled a hammer at a giant screen projecting an authoritarian face. The reference was obvious to anyone who had read George Orwell. The novel, 1984. Big Brother. Total control. Apple was saying, without a single word, that its new computer was going to break all of that, that the individual was going to take back the power. It was a bold message for a technology company, and it worked. 2 days later, they introduced the Macintosh. The Macintosh was not the first personal computer, but it was one of the first to make a serious bet on a graphical interface. Instead of typing text commands, the user moved a cursor and clicked on icons. The mouse, which already existed, stopped being a laboratory peripheral and became the center of the experience. The idea was that a computer did not have to be intimidating or complicated. It could be visual, it could be intuitive, it could be for anyone, not just engineers. At $2,495, it was not exactly cheap, and it struggled to break through the market right away. But the direction it set was clear. Technology should adapt to the user, not the other way around. That same year, on the other side of the world, inside a research institute in Moscow, a programmer named Alexei Pajitnov created a game that did not seem destined to become anything remarkable. He called it Tetris. Geometric pieces falling from above, and the player had to fit them together without leaving gaps. Simple, repetitive, hypnotic. Pajitnov built it almost for fun, to test the capabilities of his computer. For years it circulated informally among Soviet researchers before making its way to the rest of the world, where it would become one of the best-selling video games in history. But, in 1984, it was barely an experiment with shapes on a green screen. Video games as a whole were growing, both as an industry and as a culture. After the collapse of the North American market at the end of 1983, which had left devastating numbers and companies bankrupt, Nintendo was preparing an answer from Japan. The Nintendo Entertainment System was slowly making its way to the United States with a lineup that included a plumber named Mario. The culture of electronic gaming had not died. It was reorganizing itself with new players and new rules. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the summer brought the Olympic Games. It was the first time since 1932 that the city had hosted the event, and they arrived under strange circumstances, with the Soviet Union and several countries from the Eastern Bloc absent. The Moscow boycott was payback for the one led by Western nations in 1980, when the Games were held in the Soviet capital following the invasion of Afghanistan. Politics kept cutting through sports like a fault line. But Los Angeles 1984 took a different turn. Without significant public funding as its primary backbone, The organizing committee bet on a commercial model. Private companies sponsored events, facilities, entire categories. Television networks paid fortunes for broadcast rights. The Games became a precision-engineered television spectacle, with an opening ceremony that leaned more toward showbiz than tradition. And it worked financially. It was one of the first Olympic editions to turn a profit. The modern sports commercial model found a successful testing ground in Los Angeles. On the athletic side, the name that stood out above everything else was Carl Lewis. The American sprinter and jumper won 4 gold medals. In the 100 meters, the 200 meters, the long jump, and the 4x100 relay. He matched the Olympic record set by Jesse Owens in 1936. The comparison was inevitable, and Lewis accepted it without false modesty. He was the perfect figure for games designed for television. Charismatic, dominant, impossible to ignore. But 1984 was not only Olympic imagery and glowing screens. In December, in the city of Bhopal, in central India, a chemical plant owned by Union Carbide accidentally released a cloud of toxic gas in the middle of the night. 40 tons of methyl isocyanate escaped into the neighborhoods surrounding the factory while people slept. Thousands died in the first hours. The numbers vary depending on the source, but the most conservative estimates point to more than 3,000 immediate deaths. And some figures climb considerably higher when accounting for deaths in the months and years that followed. Hundreds of thousands suffered permanent damage to their lungs, their eyes, their nervous systems. Bhopal became a symbol of the dangers of chemical industry operating without adequate oversight in countries with weaker regulations. Legal battles dragged on for decades. The plant still stands abandoned today, and the contaminated soil has never been fully remediated. That same October, in New Delhi, Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by 2 of her own bodyguards, both of whom were Sikh. The attack was a response to the military operation Gandhi had ordered months earlier at the Golden Temple in Amritsar, the holiest site in Sikhism, where armed militants had taken refuge. The operation left hundreds dead and opened a deep wound in the Sikh community. Her assassination triggered a wave of brutal violence against Sikhs across multiple Indian cities. The clashes left thousands dead within just a few days. Violence, retaliation, political grief, and communal hatred converged in one of the darkest chapters in modern Indian history. In Africa, the crisis was different in nature but equally devastating. Ethiopia was in the grip of a catastrophic famine, made worse by years of drought, an ongoing armed conflict, and a government that was slow to acknowledge the scale of the disaster. The images that reached international media, particularly a BBC report broadcast in October, shook the world. Refugee camps, malnourished children, displaced families. Estimates put the number of people at risk at over 1 million. The international response began to take shape. Donations, aid shipments, diplomatic pressure. And from the music world, something was starting to come together that would fully emerge in early 1985. Musicians from different countries were preparing benefit collaborations and songs to raise funds. The Ethiopian famine also changed the way the entertainment industry engaged with humanitarian crises. On the geopolitical front, 1984 had its own shifts. In the Soviet Union, Yuri Andropov, who had come to power in 1982, died in February after barely more than a year in office. He was succeeded by Konstantin Chernenko, another aging leader with serious health problems. From the outside, the perception was of a superpower with fragile elderly leadership that seemed unable to renew itself. The Cold War remained very much alive. Tensions in Central America, military presence in various corners of the globe, nuclear rhetoric on both sides. Reagan had called the Soviet Union the evil empire the year before. And in 1984, he was reelected by one of the widest margins in American electoral history. His Democratic opponent, Walter Mondale, carried only one state. The electoral map turned almost entirely Republican red. And through all of this, popular culture kept building its own parallel world, loud, bright, and addictive. In theaters, Ghostbusters packed audiences for weeks, blending comedy, special effects, and a soundtrack engineered to stay in your head. The Terminator introduced Arnold Schwarzenegger as a killing machine from the future, and quietly planted questions about artificial intelligence and fate that would echo for decades. Purple Rain took Prince to another level entirely. The film, the music, and the visual identity fused into something that went far beyond a rock album. Madonna kept rising as a global figure with Like a Virgin, and MTV, barely 3 years old, was already the defining channel for anyone trying to understand what youth music looked like in the English-speaking world. 1984 was the year the screen established itself as the primary lens through which the world processed itself. Technology was promising to put power in the hands of individuals. Entertainment was promising bigger, more vivid, more accessible emotions. And all the while, in other parts of the planet, reality remained hard, urgent, and far from any kind of shine. Screens showed what they wanted to show, and what stayed out of frame was, more often than not, what mattered most.